We doing okay now?
Go.
Good. Okay. All right. Tonight, our guest speaker is Dr. Terry Powis, who is of Kennesaw State University, and he's going to be talking about the Cummings site, reconstructing daily life in the hinterlands of Etowah. I'll be interested to see what the hinterlands are defined as there. He's been running field schools from Kennesaw State University there for several seasons, and he's working on a Middle Mississippian period site, 1250 to 1325 or thereabouts. He's going to tell us a whole lot more about that, but I thought I'd tell you about him. He's a New World archaeologist and has been working heavily in the Maya area in Belize, a site by the name of Takbitun in Belize, and has been studying the site and its development in that middle pre-classic area. He's also had a paper on the DNA origins of cacao, which apparently came out of Ecuador about 5300 BP. So he's not only working in the southeast, but he's working in the Maya area and is doing research on other subjects in South America. Probably enough said now. Let's just see what he has to say. Welcome, Terry. We're glad to have you here. Sorry about all the confusion here.
That's fine, thank you.
It's all yours.
Is the
Go ahead and
PowerPoint?
share your screen.
I gotta share it again.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. What I want to do is talk for the next half hour or so about some of my local research. I've been an archaeologist for over 30 years. I have 3 different research areas. One is the ancient Maya down in Central America. I also do residue analysis on artifacts, looking for ancient substances like chocolate and chili and all that kind of stuff. But I also do local research where primarily my students come in. I run a local field school in the Cartersville area in the Etowah River Valley. And I've been working in this area for the last 12 years or so.
Okay.
I'm not able to advance this. Oh, okay. Okay.
There we go.
So, sorry. So one of the things that's really fascinated me over the last several years locally is trying to understand more about prehistoric peoples during the woodland and Mississippian periods. And for the most part, I've been excavating middle woodland sites. And 2 years ago, we uncovered a Middle Mississippian village site. And so that's what I want to talk about today. It's only located a few kilometers to the northwest of Etowah, which of course is the preeminent site during the Mississippian period. We're very fortunate to have been work very close to this major site and try to uncover as much information about the relationship between a large site like Etowah and a very small village site where we're digging. And so what I want to do is talk about our last couple of seasons and what we've been able to uncover that provides some basis for a relationship between these two sites. I'm not going to talk about Etowah because everyone is familiar with Etowah, but I do want to let you know that we are located in the valley, and so there's a geographic connection between the two sites. As you can see here, the name of the site is Cummings, and that's named after the landowner. The Cummings site is located on private property. And as you can see here, it's very close to the Etowah River. Specifically, it's on Pettit Creek that drains into the Etowah River. And here's a close-up. In the yellow triangle is where we have identified the village site. As you notice from this particular slide, there are lots of other sites highlighted in red. And we think, based on what we've uncovered so far, that 9BR 710 to the south is in fact the same site that I have circled in yellow. So what we identified as a small site to begin with actually is growing by the field season. This is a LiDAR image that we just took a couple of months ago, showing this particular area of the Etowah River Valley that we're working in. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
No,
Okay,
where?
so this triangle is where we've been doing our field work.
Okay.
And over in this location over here, there's a mid-19th century plantation. During my field school every year, we spend half the semester digging this antebellum site, and then the other half digging the prehistoric site over in this part over here. So students get a really good understanding of historic and prehistoric material in a field setting. These pictures here just these pictures here just really show what the site looks like when we're there at different times of the year. It's not in an the picture I showed before, there was a big agricultural field where cotton and soy are planted year round. The part of the site that I'm in is in the tree line, and it's never been plowed. And that's really important for what we're going to talk about here in a couple of minutes. Located right beside the prehistoric site is this 1925 tenant farmer house. This was built by the family, Cummings family, that lived at the plantation site that I just showed here a second ago. So this historic site sits directly on top of the prehistoric site. All right, so over the last couple of years, we knew there was a site here, but it took us a couple of years to find out, to really pinpoint where it was. And we did that through shovel testing and then some excavation units that allowed us to find our first house at the site. And here you can see some students learning how to shovel test on your left, and then phase 2 excavation units on your right. If we pull back a little bit, we can see in this particular picture that we have set up our phase 3 excavation, because through our phase 1 and phase 2, we found evidence that indicated there was a prehistoric house in this area. And so we decided to open it up, peel it back. We've put in 50 units now of different sizes in this area to uncover a house. And what you're looking at here is a drone picture so that you can see the historic house on the left. And then where the excavation unit is, our big block excavation, you can see what appears to be a rectangle with rounded corners. And this is a burned Middle Mississippian house. If we zoom in, I think you're able to see that quite clearly. And if you just follow my cursor here, you will see this is the outline of the building. So it's rectangular with rounded corners. There's 4 meters on each side, so about 15 feet. We have the rounded corners. We suspect that the opening to the house is down over here in the southwest corner. If you pay attention to my cursor again, you can see, we know this house burned down because you can see these burned posts. There's one here. There's another one here. This is a burned post, another burned post, burned post, and we have posts going pretty much all the way around that indicate that this house had burned.
Job.
So this is drone. This is about 100 feet up, and so it really does show the plan view of the house. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, you can see these individual posts that I just pointed to. We have a central hearth right here in the middle. It's very small. It's only 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters, maybe a little bit smaller than that. What you're looking at here is a view looking to the south. And if you look at all the little red nails along the outside, this is showing you the outline of the house. Okay, going all the way around. You can see that. The orange string is showing individual posts. So we're still excavating this, so we're still finding posts, but for the most part, we have the majority of them. And the yellow string represents the preserved floor of the house. Okay. When the house burned, it was such an intense heat that it actually burned the floor surface, so that we have that 700 years after the event. I wish there's a better picture. It's hard taking a picture of the central hearth here, but this is what it is. And we recovered a bunch of plant remains that we're currently analyzing to find out what their diet subsistence practices were during this time. It's our only indication right now of what they may have been eating is coming from in and around this hearth. So before moving on to the artifacts that we found inside the house on the floor, if you've ever been to Etowah, and I'm sure most people have, when you exit the modern building, you walk towards the site, you see this reconstructed Wilbanks phase house that was reconstructed by Carl Etheridge. And if you guys know, if anyone knows Carl Etheridge, he works with me out at this site every week when we're out there. He's the one who rebuilt this house, and this is an exact duplicate of what we actually excavated. This is about 15 feet on a side. It's square with rounded corners. And so every day we're out digging, this is exactly what we see with what we're uncovering. So it's quite remarkable that Carl has been able to reconstruct this based on the one excavated house at Etowah. We happen to have a second one that's a couple kilometers away. Okay, so one of the interesting things about this particular house is that we know that it burned down. We have all the posts, and we have literally buckets and buckets and buckets of daub, or the clay, as you know, that was pressed against the poles for insulation purposes. All of this, when the house burned, just collapsed in on itself, and there's just a ton of this material that really helped, I think, preserve some of the artifacts that we're finding on the floor. And if anyone's ever interested in daub, I have it for you guys to look at. Okay. So this is it's a preliminary map of what the house floor looks like. You can see the outline. It doesn't look as rectangular with rounded corners, but we've modified this subsequently. All the dark circles are posts, and all the colors you see in there represent all the artifacts that we found on the floor of the house, which indicates to us that the people who lived in this house, the inhabitants, may have been away doing something. When they came back, they found their house burned down because all the possessions were left on the floor as a result of burning. So we don't see where the house is abandoned and people took everything with them. Everything seems to be laid on the floor, and some of the artifacts are of particular interest, and others we just can't make heads or tails of, that maybe some of you guys can help to explain them. So what I want to do is talk about the artifacts, but before doing that, we actually radiocarbon dated one of the posts. You can see where the green arrow is there, and it came back with a really tight date of 1260 to 1300. And that fits into a timeline when Etowah was reoccupied. So around this time, the late 13th century, Etowah is reoccupied, and becomes the major regional powerhouse in the area. And as Etowah ascends to this prominence, we start seeing an infilling of the valley with a bunch of people moving in from different locations. And they end up occupying a site like Cummings, just a couple kilometers away from Etowah. So how these people are related to those at Etowah, we still have to figure out. But what we're looking at is just how does the house size and the contents that we're finding at Cummings, how is that related to what's going on at Etowah? Do we see the same kinds of things with the houses over there? And I can get to that in a few minutes. What I want to do, I will tell you that all the posts for the house were made of pine. So we know that. All right, so what you're looking at here is a broken pottery vessel with a celt that's just in front of you. You can see the celt right here. And here's just a random stone, but you can see this is a really good picture showing you the floor surface and how that is burned all the way around here. So we have these artifacts sitting right on the floor. And you can see the burning inside this pottery vessel, the interior of it, right at the interior base. And this celt, the beveled edge is all broken. So I guess it was used for chopping or clearing or something like that. In a different part of the house on the floor, you can see this tiny little effigy vessel. It's zoomorphic. This is a little tail, and I'll show you another picture of this here. We're missing the head on this side, but we do have a tail here. On this opposite side, over in one of these corners, we have a large rim sherd, and I'll show you that as well. So that one pottery vessel that was on the floor, after we cleaned it up, this is what it looks like. It's a Wilbanks complicated stamped jar. You could take this sherd and throw it anywhere in Etowah, and it would fit in quite nicely. But all the pottery that we have inside this house on the floor is Wilbanks complicated stamped. I'm not sure if you can see the pottery vessel over here in the upper right, highly polished on the inside. It's a very small dish, and you can see this. I don't know if it's a tail, a feathered tail, it might be a bird's tail or something like that. If you squint, you might be able to see what I'm looking at. This is over in the bottom left-hand corner. This is that large jar sherd that I showed in that previous picture on the floor. And here's another effigy vessel, a very small bowl that has a dog, deer, fox. I don't know what stylized animal that is. But we do have these two small bowls or dishes, and they may either be utilitarian or maybe for ritual purposes that we have to figure out. Then over here in the bottom right-hand corner, and again, I don't know if anyone can see this, it's a very small jar it's only about 10 centimeters high. And we have a couple of those, and that's really interesting. We have really small jars, really big jars, and then these really small bowls. Other artifacts found directly on the floor. The center middle is a pipe bowl. We'll test that for residues, but hopefully it comes back as being tobacco or something. Or maybe some, maybe wacky tobacco. I don't know. I'll have to see what goes on there. The upper right, I already showed you a picture of the celt. That's the top one from the floor by that pottery vessel. That shows where, and then we found another celt in another part of the house on the floor that looked like it was never been used. The bottom center is a chert hammerstone, and we found a couple of those. And again, some of these objects on the floor are quite large, and navigating around the floor without sort of stubbing your toe would have been very interesting 700 years ago. We found a couple of PPKs, projectile point knives, the little Mississippian triangulars, very common for the time period. And what I want to do is just spend a couple of minutes on some of the more unusual artifacts that we found from this from the house floor. If anyone's ever seen one of these things before in the upper left, you can let me know. We think it's some kind of a ceramic stopper for a bottle. What the contents of the bottle may have been, we don't know. The bottom left, this is a broken spatula, and the spatula is made out of metavolcanic, just like the celts are. And there are a lot of striations on this, probably from wear. And I'll get into what the wear pattern might be here in a second. Some of the other artifacts found on the floor of the house were very intriguing to us. They didn't seem like they were, I mean, they're domestic in the sense that they're found in the house, but whether or not they're utilitarian items is something different, like a celt used for chopping or clearing or something like that. That's something you use in day-to-day activities. But these artifacts are something different. And what you're looking on the left are 3 pieces of mica. They look like they're roughly cut, and that's probably about the best I could say for that. The 2 in the middle are styluses. Typically, you can hold them in your hand like you would a pencil. And we think that these 2 styluses were involved in the production of art. And the reason I say that is because on the right top, we have a big chunk of hematite. And in the bottom right, we have a piece of graphite. And both of those during Mississippian times were ground down and used as pigments for decorating, whether it's the human body or its shell or something else. It's leading us to wonder whether or not perhaps these farmers who were living in the periphery or hinterlands of Etowah were actually part-time artists. And I say that because this stone pallet was found on the floor as well. And it might not look like very much, but when we used low magnification on this pallet, it indicated that perhaps there was hematite embedded in it, and I'll show you a picture of that here in a second. But pallets are pretty standard during Mississippian times. A whole bunch have been found at Etowah. They look a lot different from the one that we found at Cummings, right? But nonetheless, the ones at Etowah have been tested for residue and pigments have been found on them. And so through our preliminary research, under low magnification, if you look at the picture on the right, all that you see that's sort of reflecting light is ground up hematite. And so we're thinking that they rubbed the hematite onto the sandstone palette up in the upper left-hand corner. And then maybe with the styluses or something like that, we're extracting that from the pallets and then used to draw. So our next step is to actually try to have the palette chemically tested to see if it is in fact hematite, and then also to see whether or not it matches the chemical signature of the chunk of hematite that you see in the bottom left. And if we have a match, then these people are doing more than just planting corn, beans, and squash in the periphery of Etowah. They're actually some kind of a specialist involved in something that we would regard as being art, but what that is, we don't have the smoking gun to be able to say what that is. So it's one step at a time. But all this is student directed. Students are figuring all this out for themselves, and I just happen to be reporting on this today. Really fascinating to sort of see what people were doing in their downtime when they weren't farming. What I wanted to do is just spend a couple of minutes shifting gears for a little bit. We have at Cummings just one house. And it took us a couple years to find it, but as I mentioned, it is in a tree line, and so it's never been plowed. So we found daub for this house within 10 centimeters of the surface. It's telling us that this house is intact, outside of, some root damage and whatnot. It's not been plowed. And so we have a really good opportunity to really see what people were doing 700 years ago when they're not living at a major center like Etowah. So if we're able to excavate one house at a time, we'll do that. The big question is this a small village with one house or a hamlet, or do we have multiple houses, multiple families, and somehow all of them are connected to what's going on at Etowah? And I mentioned a few minutes ago that when we first started, where the yellow triangle is, we had a hunch that what we were finding was probably connected to the red circle out in the middle of the field. So what we did a few months ago is we had Chet Walker, who's very well known for doing remote sensing in the area. He came out and provided his time to do a swath in between the yellow triangle and the red circle, to do some magnetometry work to see if there were any houses in between. Yes, if there are houses there, they are out in the middle of a plowed, an active agricultural field that's regularly plowed. But at least if we're able to detect anything, then we'd be able to go out and investigate and then sort of connect the dots. And from this particular image that you see here, it took them a day to do this area that you see in black and white. There are a lot of different anomalies that you see here. This is a close-up of it. And if you look carefully, there's some dark areas that are square to rectangular in shape. And those he has deemed to be houses. And so based on his analysis of what's going on in this particular field, there are multiple houses with which we can investigate. So we're not looking at just one house as a comparison with Etowah. And so this is what, if you look at what the previous map was, he basically turned those black and white anomalies into red and blue areas for me, the archaeologist, to say, hey, this is where you need to dig when you have an opportunity to do so. So ideally, what we like to be able to do is compare the house at Cummings to other sites in the area where they've also excavated a Wilbanks phase house. And that might be a very straightforward thing to do, but it's not. As of today, there's only three Wilbanks phase houses that have been excavated, and only 2 of them have been done with modern excavation techniques. That's the one at the Cummings site, and then one at the Long Swamp site. For some of you guys may have heard that site, that's located in Cherokee County, also on the Etowah River, but several kilometers upstream from Etowah itself. The third house outside of Long Swamp and Cummings, that's Wilbanks phase, is the one that Sears excavated in 1958 in front of Mound B, which is in the lower right corner of your screen. In the 1950s, when that house was excavated, of course, it wasn't done with modern techniques. And what I mean by that is we can't find any of the artifacts from the house to compare with the ones that we have found from Cummings and from Long Swamp. So really the only comparison, after, you think about all the archaeology that's been done here in North Georgia, there's only 3 houses and only 2 we can compare to each other. And the Long Swamp site that was excavated back in 2007, Edwards Pittman, the CRM company, did a phenomenal report on their excavation that allows me, as well as my students, to be able to look in depth at what the house from Cummings and the house from Long Swamp really look like when they're side by side. Having said that, the picture in front of you is is of structure 1. And you can see that in the top image, you can see where it says structure 1. It's sort of, there's a square there. And the reconstruction that Carl did that you see in your bottom left-hand corner is based on the structure 1 out in front of Mound B. And so what I have here is a picture of what the structure 1 looked like at Etowah, with a little bit, with as much information as we have about that house. So the house at Etowah is a single set post, just like the one at Cummings. It's square with rounded corners, just like at Cummings. It's 15 feet on its side, exactly the same as the one at Cummings. Ours is semi-subterranean, so is the one here. They never found an entrance to the one at Etowah. We do have interior support posts. There's 4 of them. We've yet to excavate them. There was no prepared floor at Etowah, but as I mentioned, as you saw, there is a well-preserved floor with the Cummings house with all those artifacts on top. And so there's just a couple other points here as well. So remarkably, the one house found at Etowah is very similar to one at Cummings. And I think that's really important because being in the periphery, the tendency might be to think that the houses would be smaller, more impoverished when it comes to artifacts and things like that. And right now we don't see that. And that sort of begs the question, what kind of a relationship do we see with these people inhabiting the Cummings site only being, 3 kilometers or 1.5 miles or so from Etowah? They could be related. They could be distantly related. It opens up so many questions for us. And I wish we had more information to be able to make these connections, but we don't. I'm going to end here because I don't want to go too long in case people have questions. But Adam King from the University of South Carolina, who you guys may know, about 10 years ago did some geophys at the site in the main plaza between all the mounds. And they found a number of anomalies, including houses. Like you see where it says grid 6, you can see that square house almost with rounded corners. And Adam was able to put in test units into some of these mounds, and in particular the one you see in front of you, and came down on top of Wilbanks complicated stamped material, just like what we're finding. I believe the house that's associated here was also burned. So we don't have the entire house excavated. It's likely not going to happen at Etowah, but it does provide a little bit more information that there's a second house at Etowah that we can, maybe start doing a little bit of comparative analysis with. But really the Long Swamp site and the full excavation they did of structure 3 at that site is our best link to really understanding Middle Mississippian life, in the 13th century. And just to end off here, I've just put the plan view beside the drone footage on the left. And one of the things we're doing right now is trying to make sense of the artifacts on the floor, just to see if there's any patterns. I will direct your attention to, I don't know if everyone can see this yellow line here that kind of curves. We think this might be some kind of a partition, some kind of a wall inside the house. Other than that, we don't really have any division of space within the house to say that people were sleeping in one side, people were cooking or doing food prep in another, that there's pottery basketry or lithic production going on. Right now, we just have several artifacts that are on the floor, and we're just trying to see whether or not it forms any patterns. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Oh,
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question on Cliff. When you mentioned houses in Georgia, Middle Mississippian, what about the rest of the southeast or Illinois or Virginia or Alabama? I mean, how many other places have been excavated and found house sites like this across the southeast or the east?
The short answer is there's a lot. What I'm trying to do with my students is to start local and then move from there. And so what they're doing this semester is really just trying to understand as much as they can about the house at Etowah and also at Long Swamp, because their house looks identical to ours, but they actually have features embedded in the floor. And some of the artifacts are different. And just given the proximity, they're much further away from Etowah than we are. And so we're starting local, and then we'll move out and start doing more of a comparative data set with other sites that have a good chronology like ours.
Hey, Terry, thank you for talking to us. I have one question. Near excavations near the Hearth, did you find anything like burned acorns or fish bones or freshwater mussels or anything like that?
Now, preservation, while good for the house floor and the artifacts, ecofacts, in terms of botanical remains or any kind of animal bones, zero. We've collected a lot of soil from the floor itself. So something might pop up there when it comes to shell or bone. But right now we're just looking at carbonized plant remains from in and around the hearth. That's going to be our only clue, indirect clue to diet and subsistence practices outside of, the celts and the projectile points, indicating and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
I do have, if you want, I can show you a picture of the Long Swamp house, if you're interested in that, just from a comparative point of view.
Sure, why not?
Sure.
Yes.
Hey, I just got to scroll down. Don't mind me. So can you guys actually see the image to the right? Or is everyone's pictures blocking it?
No,
No,
we can see
not
it.
now.
You should be able to see there's an arrow that says structure 3 halfway down, and you can see it's a square building with rounded corners.
It's pretty small, but yes, we can see it.
I've got another picture that's going to be blown up, but you can see on the left-hand side, it's square, single set post. It's a little bit larger at 7.5 meters in size. Date-wise, it fits in nicely with what we have at Cummings. And if you look at this next picture here, this is a blow-up of the house. See all the individual posts, but then if you look right in the center where the red kind of amorphous circle is, that's the puddle hearth.
So what?
It's called a puddle hearth. I have a picture I'll show you. Ours is actually dug into the floor. Puddle hearths like this are actually sit on the floor surface. But if you look at this image to the left, you'll see that there are different colors, and those represent pit features that are excavated into the floor of the house. And they contain all sorts of different kinds of artifacts that are different from what we have found. Their house also burned down, and they actually had the remains of reed mats that they were sleeping on. So what they've been able to do based on what they've recovered is to do something like this. So they've been able to circle areas where they think different activities were going on within that.
Yes.
And if you look at the upper right, that's the puddle hearth. It's basically just kind of drop down on top of the floor surface for cooking purpose. So the house is the house shape is very similar to ours. I'm not comfortable or confident that I can start drawing circles based on what we have, right? We have one projectile point. I don't want to put a circle around that and say hunting or excuse me, some kind of processing. We have 2 cells. I don't know if I need to put a circle around that and call it something else. Those artifacts that might be related to art, they're spread out across the entire floor surface. And so I don't really feel comfortable putting a circle around the entire interior of the house, saying that, you know, artwork was taking place. So it is interesting that we have 2 fully excavated Wilbanks phase houses that are in the periphery of Etowah, and there's some similarities and yet there's some differences. That's why we really need more houses excavated, and I'm hopeful that through the remote sensing at Cummings, some of those blue squares that you saw on the map that I showed are houses that we can excavate.
Terry?
Yeah.
May I ask, you showed a single 1x1 that looked like you were going into another house in your same site. Is there a hope to expand that to see what that house looks like and how it's different from the one you have?
So I showed one picture of Etowah, right? It was a 1x1 meter unit. Right now, we don't have a second house, but we know where they are. And this fall, maybe even this summer, we're going to start looking for those other houses. So on the field school, we can identify one and start digging it so the students can uncover a second one that we can now compare to the first one and see if the contents are the same, the house is the same. And we're just not sure at this point. So yeah, more work. Let me just want to. I will provide one last bit of information here. Is you see the big field that's outlined in blue? That piece of property is to be sold, and they're going to put a subdivision up there. So they've been doing some CRM work out there to see if there's any other houses, and they've uncovered one house right here. So we have our house over here, and now there's another one here. And remember, all those blue squares that I showed you are in this area here. So this is where we are going to concentrate our efforts moving forward, even with the understanding that this has been plowed for 150 years and there might not be anything there but posts.
Terry?
Yeah.
I was manager at Etowah for 6 years, all the way to 2010. And I was there when the Wilbanks period house was reconstructed and utilized all the archaeological information to get that done. And is this area downstream? Is this before the excavations for the
Leak site?
Leak site? Yes.
So the leak site is, you can see it up here in the upper left hand.
Okay.
So this is leak, and I'm about 500 meters from it.
Okay. At Etowah, Adam King, and doing the GPR studies there, mapped the whole site, and you have these square structures arranged around what he called plaswellas. It's a little area with an area in the front of these buildings that are around a square, and there's like a barbacoa that was shared amongst the people in that area, that particular plaswella, and you find those quite a bit all around the Etowah site. So there's quite a few of those square structures at Etowah. Fascinating, and Adam believes that all the way down the Etowah River is nothing but one big urbanized area where the Indians lived and may have produced crafts at different locations. But it's still fascinating. There's a lot of work to do, and this right here adds a lot more to it.
Yeah, Chet Akins in the last several months has been doing lots of remote sensing all around Etowah, and there are hundreds and hundreds of houses. And so, because I do mostly woodland, middle woodland stuff, I'm trying to get caught up on what's going on during the Middle Mississippian period in terms of settlement and where houses are actually located. And so, my understanding during Mississippian times is that in some of these larger villages, they form arcs with a big plaza, you know, in front. And what this is looking like here is not that. It's these little sort of household compounds, maybe, you know, family units that are facing inwards towards a small little plaza or plazuelo area. And these kind of dot the landscape. And that's what we're going to try to figure out here. It doesn't mean that what we find is going to be the pattern everywhere. But one of the things that strikes me, given it's 2022, we really don't know a lot about what's going on in the periphery of Etowah. You know, just within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers from the site core. And to your point, how far did the urban area extend outside of Etowah? I would, and not knowing this, I would tend to think when you're 3 kilometers out, you're kind of in suburbia, the hinterlands, periphery. But maybe not. Maybe it's dense all the way out to this point like Atlanta is, where it's just habitation. And
I can't read the names.
we need to figure that out.
Interesting.
And whether they're using crafts out here.
Lynn Satterfield.
Any other
Anybody
questions?
else have questions?
I got one more question or statement. Is Bartow County is one of the few counties that actually has an archaeological ordinance, the Etowah Valley Historical Ordinance. And any development like what you're talking about for a housing development here, I saw it when I was at Etowah across the river. They were going to build houses right up against the river, and you've seen those from Mound Day at Etowah, which have been horrendous. And because of that ordinance, there had to be an archaeological survey. And lo and behold, they found graves, they found Indian burials everywhere. And so the developer had to move the development away from that area and turn the area where the burials were into a public park. So that's good. I hope that area there that it looks like it does border the Etowah River, and that will have to be done before any development can go forward there.
Basically, you're looking at about 50 to 60 acres of phase 3 data recovery. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money, number of sites that are in that area to fully mitigate those. And they started doing phase 1 back in the fall. So they're not even in phase 2 yet.
Wow.
So it's going to take a long time. And even if inside that blue area is, becomes houses, we have from that blue line over to my yellow triangle, it's different property, and we'd be able to excavate any of those houses that are there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Powis. We appreciate your coming to us. Sorry you couldn't join us for supper, but maybe next time.
Absolutely.
Yes, I hope you get through this COVID quickly and painlessly.
I'm doing pretty good. Could have been a lot worse, but I was able to make it tonight, so I'm very appreciative.
Thank you so much for doing this with
Yeah.
us. We've enjoyed this very much.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Love
Yeah,
this.
thank you very much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good night. Good night.